FX?
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I was just saying that with the reports in South African Rand, the Rand over that period has strengthened quite a lot over the 2016 number. So things could look weaker where in fact they were stronger in constant currency.
Yeah, and actually, no, you're absolutely right there, because I was going to also mention to you that I struggled with that as well, because there's a lot of volatility with FX going on with Aspen. So it made some of the calculations that I normally do in my reviews a little more. I had variances that I normally don't have, but I knew that the Rand was fluctuating along with other functional currencies. So I think you're right. Like, for instance, the cash flow statement, when I actually analyze the cash flow statement, I actually recalculate the variances on the cash flow statement to see if they tie to the variances on the balance sheet. And, I adjust for acquisitions and divestitures and so forth. And I did have some variances in the working capital area. But from all indications, my sense was that it was due to FX, because the balance sheet is translated at FX at the balance sheet date, where the cash flow statement is translated using the weighted average rates for the year. So when you look at companies that are experiencing a lot of FX volatility, it makes some of the calculations a little more difficult to get the comfort, but I didn't have any reason to be concerned about it. So I think you're absolutely right there.
Okay.
Let's see. Just bear with me as I flip pages here. Okay, the acquisition accounting, I looked through all the acquisitions as described starting on page 23, and all the acquisition accounting seemed to make sense. The only issue was, again, everything going to intangibles with indefinite lives. So I had no other concerns about that. The contingent consideration and so forth, payable in future periods, some of which are tied to milestones, all that looked appropriate. I looked at all the segment analysis, and if you look at it close, starting on page 25, it goes on for a few pages. You'll see much of the things that I mentioned in the memo, where certain products and certain segments are, have had somewhat of a downturn, but nothing monumental, but, something to note. Okay. Just a couple things on page 30. This goes back to intangibles. I don't know, because I know that you were doing some comparisons between, Aspen and other peer companies, some of which might be under U.S. GAAP. I just wanted to make sure you understood that there is a difference between U.S. GAAP and IFRS when it comes to R&D costs. In the U.S., we still require you to immediately expense research and development costs, but under IFRS, you have to expense research, but you can capitalize development. So if you are doing a peer-to-peer comparison, you might have to adjust for that in your models, and that's described on page 30. There's a paragraph about a little more than halfway down that talks about software development. I don't think this was material from all indications, but the narrative seemed to be contradictory. Under IFRS, you are allowed to capitalize software development costs as you are in the U.S. What kind of threw me was the first sentence of the paragraph before they say the right thing is they say costs associated with developing or maintaining computer software programs are recognized as an expense as incurred. But then they go on to say, more appropriately, that software development costs are capitalized when they meet certain thresholds. So that paragraph was not written well. It was almost confusing. I know that I can tell you this, software maintenance costs absolutely get expensed as incurred, but I don't know the difference between the nature of the development costs in the first sentence and the nature of the development costs in the second sentence, because in the first sentence they say they expense, in the second sentence they say they capitalize it, which is what's required. So you might want to ask them to clarify that, or tell them they should clarify that going forward.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay. Just bear with me here. If you do look at page 32, this just is consistent with what we talked about. At the bottom of page 32 is the intangibles that actually have finite lives, and just consistent with what I told you. Intellectual property, they have up to 12 years. Product participation and contractual rights up to 42 years, and computer software up to 9 years. intellectual property up to 12 years may or